Good morning. It is 11 o'clock a.m. on Sunday, September 23rd, 2018. I'm Christiana Ellis, and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. So, today is Sunday, which means I'm talking about my rewatch of The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya with the Season 2 episode entitled Bamboo Leaf Rhapsody. Now, this represents a little bit of a jump in time, uh, as we encountered quite a bit during season 1 because of the order we're watching the episodes in. And so, technically, this episode takes place before the summer of the Endless Eight. In particular, we're talking about this, taking place in early July as opposed to in late August. But at the same time, I think it feels a little more like a good transition here in the sense that we finished the Endless Eight with them finishing summer vacation and going back to school. So technically, having an episode now where they're back in school, and it's also an episode in which time travel happens. So I don't know, it feels good to me. I really like this episode. It uses a lot of sort of just concepts that I really enjoy, but also digs pretty deep into, pretty deep. It digs deeper into a few of our characters in a really kind of remarkable way. In some respects, you could call this a filler episode in the sense that it doesn't take place within any of the other major arcs, but in its own way, it's kind of just like its own one episode arc as opposed to just a side adventure. Because it definitely delves into the psyche of several of our characters, all at the same time as playing around with some fun science fictional concepts. So, what happens in this episode? Well, they're back in school, still in school, technically, and it is the Japanese holiday of Tanabata, which I don't really know anything about the real holiday, but at least as depicted in the episode here, the idea is you have a bamboo tree and you write wishes on these pieces of paper known as tanzaku, and then you point it at a couple of stars, which are Vega and Altair, specifically, which represent two goddesses, Orihime and Hikoboshi, and supposedly they grant your wishes. But in kind of a fun twist on that whole idea, Haruhi has a very science fiction-y interpretation of this whole thing, which is to say, those stars are 16 and 25 light years from Earth, respectively. So, it only stands to reason that your wishes would take that long to get there. Sure. And then, so you should actually not wish for something that would need to happen before your wish could even get there, because how are they supposed to grant that? So instead, you're supposed to wish for something you want to have happen 16 years from now and 25 years from now, respectively, which is a super fun idea. And I also love Kyon sort of rationally pointing out, like, well, shouldn't it take just as long for the wish to come back? Like, so shouldn't it be double that? And she's like, well, they're gods, so they probably have a way to to work it out. And so what I just really love about that idea is how much thought put into half of it, and then the other half is just, well, they're gods, they'll figure it out. That delights me, that whole idea. It's also just fun, even though the episode kind of brushes past it very quickly, to talk about the wishes that each of them write down. And it happens very quickly, so I actually took a little screenshot of each one. So we have Mikuru's wishes were, I hope to get better at sewing, and I hope to get better at cooking. And it's like, Kyon even kind of comments on that being, I'm not sure she has the hang of it. And so the idea, too, of like, that's not really a wish so much as something it's a goal, right? But anyway, Yuki just has harmony and innovation. He's like, yeah, okay. Uh, Koizumi asks for my family's well-being and world peace in that order. And so it's like you could think about it in the sense like and Koizumi admits himself that those are very boring, like standard generic wishes. And it's like, yeah, but also, but it's also like, we could debate. It's like, well, he wishes for his family's well-being before world peace. But that's fair. And then of course Kyon's, as much as he's prepared to be judgmental of everyone else, he wishes for some money and give me a house with a yard big enough to wash a dog in. Which, so bear in mind these are the subtitles that appeared on the screen in the dubbed version. It might be that the other versions have slightly varied uh, wording for these, but I like, first of all, just some money is kind of generic and pragmatic, but also just the specific detail of a house with a yard big enough to wash a dog in. I just feel like, where does he want a dog? Like, what? I like the idea that the first one is sort of very rote, but then the second one suggests a whole little fantasy narrative that he's built there. In any case, Haruhi's wishes are, I want the world to revolve around me, and I want the earth to spin in the opposite direction. Which is kind of fun to think about, especially in the specific context that we go back in time and sort of do a little bit of an orbit around young Haruhi. So in a sense, the world does kind of revolve around her, and it spins in the opposite direction, at least in the context of going backwards in time. So that's kind of fun. But so, in any case, we have Haruhi, after making her wishes, seeming kind of oddly quiet and reflective, and we're not sure why yet. But we can have, we have Mikuru leaving Kyon a little note to say, wait after everybody else leaves. And then Yuki also hands him a note, and we don't get a look at it just yet, which is kind of a fun placeholder to call back to later. But Mikuru says that she wants to take Kyon back in time 3 years. And she can't really tell him why or how or any of that sort of thing. She's just basically saying, please just say you'll do it. I can't tell you any more detail. And Mikuru is in fine form as being the super sort of, no confidence, but super cute sort of moe figure in this episode. And there's some interesting nuance to that, though, because, that said, even though she's acting that way, the scenario that we're talking about here is that she is preparing to put Kyon to sleep so that she can travel them both back in time for 3 years to accomplish a mission that he knows nothing about. And so it's just kind of like, that's actually, it's a proactive thing to do. Now she's following orders, but even still, it's just kind of the contrast between her actions and her sort of demeanor about it. But in any event, we get to meet the older Miss Asahina again when, so Kyon goes to sleep in the club room, wakes up in a park, is told that it's 3 years earlier. He's like, well, I don't know how I got here. Is it 3 years earlier? Well, you say so. But then Mikuru falls asleep, and older Miss Asahina is there and gives him kind of the same spiel, but in a very sort of different demeanor of like, still can't tell you anything, except what you need to do is walk down that way and help the person you find there. Oh, and carry my younger self with me. And he kind of mentions something about, like, it sounds like a quest. Is there a reward? And she suggests that he can kiss Mikuru, but only while she's asleep. And I like that the episode just takes a moment to kind of briefly sort of ponder the ethics of that. Like, on the one hand, like, kissing someone without them knowing while they're asleep is kind of a creepy thing to do, but technically her older self actually explicitly gave you permission, and he's kind of thinking how, like, well, that doesn't seem like something I should do, except maybe I kind of want to. And it, sidesteps the issue in the sense that he doesn't actually do it, but it's just kind of a weird thing for her to promise him or to offer him. But in any event, what we get when he goes to travel is we meet young Haruhi. And more to the point, apparently what she is preparing to do is an event that we heard about in one of the earliest episodes when Kyon is, one of his friends is telling him all about how weird Haruhi was in junior high. One of the events he cites is that she drew all of these weird symbols on the athletic field with the line marker. And what we discover here is that she didn't do it by herself. She did it with Kyon's help. And specifically, it's a weird symbol, a bunch of weird symbols, and she asks him afterwards, do you believe in aliens and time travelers and espers? And he's kind of being a little cagey, but he kind of says, yeah, I mean, I do. I've met them. And she's like, oh, you go to North High? Is that where you met them? And he's like, yeah. And then she's, North High? And then runs off and leaves. And all of a sudden he's thinking, wait, did she decide to go to North High because of this conversation? And they discuss that a little bit later. At the end of the episode, which I guess we'll come back to. But in the meantime, Mikuru wakes up. What? Her time travel device is missing. And Kyon kind of assumes, well, probably the older Miss Asahina took it. And it's part of closing some loop, because that seems to be how these time travelers operate, is this idea that the past has to be preserved. So, like, if she remembers not seeing her older self and losing the time device when she did that part, then the new loop has to replicate that. But could you make it not? That's, these are fun time travel questions that the show is mostly skimming past. But in any event, the idea that they're stuck. And again, the voice actress in the animation of Mikuru being kind of in a panic about having lost the device it's adorable. But in any event, this suddenly glancing back at these symbols on the field spurs Kyon to remember the note that Yuki left him, which he had glanced at but we never saw. But now that he pulls it out of his pocket again, she drew those symbols, which is awesome because, first of all, we know now from the Endless Eight that, she can sort of perceive through time. And so this is an indication she knew what was going to happen. Right? And so that's a sign. And sure enough, they go over to her apartment. It's 3 years earlier. And he discovers there she is with the glasses again. And it's because this is the version of Yuki from 3 years ago, who is apparently just in standby mode, just waiting for when Haruhi decides to go to North High in order to show up, which again kind of makes us like, she's there's a lot of cause and effect weirdness there, right? But in any event, her solution is to have Kyon and Mikuru just go and lie down in one of her bedrooms, and then she stops the flow of time in there for 3 years. So basically just puts them on pause for 3 years so that they can get back up to the present, which is kind of a very simultaneously amazing and yet sort of very practical solution to the problem, and creates also the delightful knowledge that in the previous time that Kyon had visited Yuki's apartment back in the original arc, when she first told him she was an alien, and they were sitting there at her little table having tea, and the idea that realizing, wait, when they had that conversation, another Kyon and Mikuru were just over in that bedroom that whole time, and she's like, "Yep." I think that's amazing. I think it's this episode is delightful in that regard. It just has all sorts of those little things. So in any event, back to school. We have seen a bit more about what things are like for Mikuru in terms of she reveals that she's kind of just a trainee. She just gets a lot of orders and doesn't always understand them, but she just has to follow them. And she's just kind of has a trust that whoever's in charge is making the right decisions, but she really has to. That's why she's sometimes confused, is because she doesn't have all of the information and she's just doing her best. And seeing a little bit more of the, her experience of things is nice. We also get a little bit of fun detail from Yuki, but we also see more of Haruhi's reflective side, of her desires to have the world be more like she wishes it were, more exciting, more interesting. The idea that these symbols that she had Kyon draw turn out to have been the language the aliens speak. But then again, 3 years ago, right? Was this, so what we can imagine is that by creating these symbols, which she hoped would be a message to aliens, she made them successfully, made them a message that aliens could understand. It's cool. And so we finished the episode with a little bit of a discussion of time travel, and this is where, the conversation about Mikuru, both versions kind of implied that you can't change the past, that there's not really an actual connection there, and that, and so what Yuki says is, if the theory itself has a contradiction internally, then it won't be able to explain away that contradiction, which is kind of an interesting philosophical concept, right? Is just the idea that, if you have a system designed to solve problems that is inherently got its own problem, that system probably can't solve its own problem. And Koizumi illustrates that by suggesting that, the logic of the game of chess is that the king is in danger and needs to get away, so why doesn't he just leave the board? Well, the rules of chess say he can't, right? But again, it's just talking about if there's a set of rules designed to abstract behavior, you have to follow the, anything that that creates some strange effects, and describe essentially using all that to hand wave away the idea of like, well, did Kyon change the past, or somehow that was always what was supposed to happen? In which case, is the future deterministic? And it's all kind of fun to think about. And so that's where we leave things off with this episode, and which is just kind of a fun little self-contained loop, which is lots of fun. So next time we're going to start the final arc of the series as it stands right now, which is the sigh of the sigh of Haruhi Suzumiya, and that has 5 parts that we'll watch just in order. And it's kind of fun because if you recall the very first episode we watched as part of this rewatch, which was The Adventures of Mikuru Asahina Episode 0, the movie that the SOS Brigade made for the Culture Festival, well, this arc is the making of. It is the story set during the making of that movie, which is a lot of fun to revisit now at the end, which is part of one of the reasons why I liked that we started with that movie. So we get to remember it and also kind of see how it all came to be. And then I think after we finish this arc, that will be all of the anime episodes that have been produced to date. But there is, of course, the film called The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya. So once we finish the 5-part Sai of Haruhi Suzumiya, we'll do the movie. And I think that will probably conclude this particular rewatch, and I'll have to pick what the next title is. So in the meantime, I will talk to you all tomorrow for 5 more minutes.